People are joining. I think, yes. Okay. Here we go. Good afternoon and welcome to the second Saturday seminar series here at the Animas Museum for October. I'm Susan Jones and Pam and Jim Dyer are here with me today at the museum. Last weekend was the Durango Cowboy Gathering, which kind of inspired us here at the museum to take a look at real history. Because here in La Plata County, as well really as in most of the United States, sheep have been historically more important than cattle. Now, this morning, Dr. Andrew Gulliford was here to speak with us about his book, The Woolly West. So I'm sorry we don't have the resources to do the hybrid Zoom and in-person talks. But if you missed Andy's talk, get his book. It's really good. And Maria's carries it for those of you here in Durango. In his book, he talks about the sheep industry, or as he calls it, and I love this word, the sheepscape in Colorado. And he also talks about the often violent conflicts between the Texas cattle industry and the sheep herders. This afternoon, we're going to be a little different. We're going to talk about the power of place, and I'm going to explain what that means, and how sheep fit into our history and how that might affect our future. Pam and Jim are here with me again today. Pam is a member of the La Plata County Historical Society's Board of Directors and has been a longtime volunteer here at the museum, putting her degree in history and archaeology to work. She's been raising sheep for over 40 years and has some great stories to tell. Her husband Jim runs healthy community food systems here in La Plata County. He helps to support local farms and ranches and to get good local food into places like the 9R school system. He was on the board of Local First and early on helped establish the Durango Farmers Market. And he's been after me and us for years to take a look at historic foodways and how they can affect the future. And well, here we are. We're doing it finally. Before we jump in, as usual, some quick Zoom housekeeping. We're using Zoom's webinar feature, which means that you're all muted and your videos are off. At the bottom of your screen, and you may need to mouse down a little to see it, there are a couple icons. To minimize distractions today, we've disabled the chat function, but if you have an immediate issue or question, please click on the Q&A icon and we'll be monitoring that. At the end of the talk, we'll open up for questions. So you can either type your questions anytime into the Q&A, but we're going to answer them at the end, or we'll let you click your little hand and raise your hand and we'll let you unmute to ask your question. But we'll deal with all of the questions online first. And then once we answer all those online questions, we'll come downstairs and answer any questions in person that people might have. And if any good stuff comes up, we'll post the questions and answers in the show notes so nobody will miss anything. This session is being recorded and you will receive an email in 24 hours with a link to the recording and any other interesting stuff that we talk about. So with that, let's go. Now, the upcoming 250th commemoration of the founding of the United States in 2026 is a once-in-a-generation opportunity for all history organizations, and we're proud to be a part of it. The logo on the right is the logo for the United States level 250th celebration of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And then here in Colorado, we're extra special because we're commemorating the 150th anniversary of Colorado statehood. You'll remember we're the Centennial State, founded in 1876. And the logo on the left is the state logo for the dual commemoration. History Colorado is involved at the state level, and we've been working with them as we go along. But here in Southwest Colorado, the La Plata County Historical Society is a big part of the local committee, and that's their logo in the middle. We've already started this commemoration. Back in February, we recognized the 150th anniversary of La Plata County, and that webinar is posted on our website. In our pop-up exhibit on the county 150th is also downstairs at the museum. And we're looking forward to 2026, and we're going to be doing programs along the way just like this one. And by the way, if you are interested in learning more about the preparations for 2026 in Southwest Colorado, go to our website, animusmuseum.org, scroll down a little bit, and you'll see that logo that's in the middle. Click on it, and you'll be sent to the local organizing committee website. Now, the American Association for State and Local History, or AASLH, of which we are a member, has taken a leading role in defining themes for the 250th commemoration. And one of those themes, which has also become one of the signature initiatives for the Southwest Organizing Committee, is called the Power of Place. To quote AASLH, place offers a powerful lens through which we can view the past. A deep engagement with place enables us to reconsider significant connections with American spaces, to a community's relationship with and the use of the land, the waterway, and the natural resources. And that's exactly what we're going to do today. So we're going to be looking at what was happening in our community during the Revolutionary era coming up, and how our place has changed over time, and how our understanding of historical developments can help us face contemporary challenges. So this is one of my favorite slides, and to me, it's in our collection. It really talks about the power of this place, and yep, there's sheep in it. This picture was taken by Dr. Benjamin Oshner. Devotees of our seminar series have heard his name before. He was a local doctor and an amateur photographer, and he did some pretty amazing work, like this picture right here. We believe this was taken near today's Rafter J community with a beautiful view of the La Plata Mountains in the backgrounds. And it really signified this part of our history that it's sometimes overlooked. And, you know, why is that? We're going to get into that today. Now, many books say that sheep came to North America in 1601. Well, no, that's not true. There are native sheep here, but the only native sheep in Colorado is the Rocky Mountain Bighorn, and they're kind of hard to catch to shear, so we're not going to talk about them. There are a bunch of issues going on right now with them. But here in the Southwest, we have a special relationship with sheep that stretches further back than the 13 colonies because of Spanish influences. In 1493, Columbus brought sheep on his voyages, mainly as meat on the hoof. They certainly weren't spinning or weaving on board. But I want to say as an aside, while the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria probably had sails made of hemp, those sails were all spun by hand and hand woven. This is way before spinning jennies and other mechanical efforts. And earlier Viking ships had sails made of wool, which starts to tell you how critical wool was for human development. Wool keeps you warm, it keeps you dry, it covers you, and sheep have you can have 2 harvests in a year of wool, and then after things are done, you can get meat from them as well, and other byproducts like meat, cheese, lanolin. They just kind of give you everything. Now, Hernando Cortez was probably the first to bring sheep to the Americas in 1538, although he kept them on his hacienda in Cuernavaca, Mexico. He may have brought the Spanish merino, which are known for their very soft wool and that were highly guarded and prized by the Spanish over the years. But he almost certainly brought, that's the guy on the left, the churra, or the churro sheep. Pam, did you want to say more about the churro?
Well, we actually raised churro for a while. It was a lot of fun. They're a wonderful breed because they are a primitive breed, and they're very versatile. They will eat anything. They'll grow anywhere, and they are a good meat and wool sheep.
So they're perfect for our environment here in Southwest Colorado.
Perfect for our place.
Our place, thank you. Our place in Southwest Colorado.
Yes.
Hernando Cortez was, the next one is Francisco Vasquez, and that's this gentleman, de Coronado, that's the gentleman pictured at right, was the first to bring sheep into what became the United States in 1540. He didn't get as far as what we call north, as we call La Plata County today, but he certainly brought sheep with him on his search for the seven cities of Cibola, for the cities of gold. And again, they were probably the churro. In 1598, Juan de Oñate brought large flocks of churro and merinos to the Rio Grande Valley as he brought colonizers over from Spain. And at that time, they were both for wool and for meat. The churro thrived in this environment and spread over what we know now as Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah. Not so much in Colorado, but that kind of came later. You know, the borders were all very fluid. Sheep don't know about borders. They're all very fluid. Before long, the introduction of sheep to the native peoples of the Southwest created a revolution in their lifestyle. The Navajo used sheep for meat, milk, of course, wool to make the beautiful blankets and rugs, which they traded with other people throughout the United States, or what became the United States later. Sheep became the currency of choice in New Spain for both indigenous people and colonizers. And the patterns of seasonal migration set in, where sheep were moved to high mountain pastures in the summer and then back down to warmer environments in the winter. And these traditions were set early on. But meanwhile, back east, kind of totally different environment. Many colonists were coming over from England, which did its best to prevent sheep from being imported to the colonies in order to protect their monopoly on the textile industry. Since many of the colonists came with textile production experience, some of the pilgrims had been weavers, and they knew how to turn wool into cloth. They did their best to get around those English laws. They bought sheep or stole sheep from Dutch colonists in New Amsterdam, and they grew their flocks. What was the statistic that you had, Pam? In 1600, there were like
10,000 sheep
10,000 sheep, and
in the colonies, most likely down type sheep, which is a medium wool raised for meat and for the wool in southeastern England.
But then in 1699, England passed a Wool Act that decreed all woolen products produced in the colonies had to be sold back to British markets. The colonists were, needless to say, not very happy about that. And that is one of the factors that ultimately led to the American Revolution. Mm-hmm. So yeah, sheep revolution, we're in there. And during the revolution, wearing clothing made of homespun wool was an act of patriotism, kind of like wearing a t-shirt with a political slogan these days. And while the struggle over wool with England may have helped us lead us to war, during the Revolutionary War, the lack of wool for uniforms and blankets, like that horrible winter at Valley Forge, almost lost us the revolution. And we see this again and again. Whenever wars come up, there's a high demand for wool, for uniforms, for blankets, and who knows what else. Wool keeps you warm even when it's wet. It's hard to burn, and it doesn't retain smells, and it's just kind of the original miracle fiber.
And once the revolution sort of was done, it allowed the colonists to experiment with breeding different types of sheep and getting different types of sheep. And I know you were going to probably mention Washington and Jefferson, but they, especially on their farms, experimented with various types of breeding sheep, including Tunisian, which came from Tunisia.
And the picture on the left is from Mount Vernon today. Those are a rare breed called Hog Island sheep. Maybe not what George had, but he was very invested in his wool flock.
And they are heirloom sheep.
Yep. The picture on the right is from modern colonial Williamsburg. And I think that's a Leicester sheep.
Okay.
I think that's what that, yeah. And and if you go to Colonial Williamsburg, boy, you can see sheep, you can see shearing, all that kind of stuff. It's sheep were just so important. Um, it gets really complicated as we lead up to the Civil War because while in the north they were developing sheep for fine wool and these down breeds and these fine breeds, in the south they used wool for what they called, and excuse my terminology, Negro cloth. But they use coarse wool that they actually imported from Europe, and there were tariffs on all the time in order to make clothes for slaves on the plantation that were cheap, but durable and usable. So it gets really complicated, and a lot of this is, we can write a book on every slide that we're talking about today, so we're going way high level. But after the Civil War, when sheep and wool were in high demand, I even read a quote. They were talking about when they were going through the battlefield at Gettysburg after the fight was over, and they could tell who was a Yankee and who was a Confederate by the cloth. Not necessarily the color of the uniform, but the Northern soldiers had wool because they had wool and they're fine wool uniforms, and the Southerners didn't have enough wool, so their uniforms were maybe cotton. They had cotton or linsey woolsey, which is a combination of wool and cotton that was cheaper to produce than pure wool. But then after the Civil War, the sheep made their way west with the people. And in the Southwest, they were already here, typically amongst the Hispanic and the Native populations. But the Anglos got in on it too. We had a lot of English settlers coming. They knew sheep. They brought their sheep with them. Kit Carson, he ran a huge flock of churro from like New Mexico. I think he went right through the San Juans, and he sold it for something like $30,000 for the whole herd in Sacramento. So even Kit Carson got in on the deal.
6,500 sheep.
6,500 sheep. It was, they say, the best deal he ever made in his life, the best financial thing. So this photo in the collections was probably taken about 1910, but I don't think things looked very much different from the 1870s when Kit Carson was running these sheep. And then in the 1870s, there were people in La Plata County running sheep. Israel Doty was a sheep rancher here in La Plata County in 1877, right after the county was, formed in 1874 and split in 1876. That year, 1877, he and one of his employees, a man named Shepard Clark, were moving a flock of sheep through Pagosa Springs when both men were murdered. And this is where we get into some of the sheep and cattle wars that Dr. Gulliford talked a lot about this morning, and kind of like, if you want to know more, get the book. That year in October 1877, when both Israel Doty and Shepard Clark were murdered, their bodies were brought back here to Animas City, and they were autopsied. And we believe they are some of the first people buried in the Animas City Cemetery. So sheep go back that far in Animas City.
And we had a lot.
And we had a lot.
In 1870, Colorado had 121,000 sheep.
Wow, more than
10
people.
years later.
10 years later.
They had 1 million.
Wow. Yeah, sheep was a big deal in Colorado. In Durango, which was established in 1880, William Wolfe, who's the gentleman in the middle, was a German immigrant who first came to the San Juans, interestingly enough, in 1858, before Durango was here, before La Plata County was here, before the Bruneau Agreement. He was a member of this government expedition and saw the San Juans. He went back east, fought in the Civil War, was a railroad machinist, but then made his way to Santa Fe, where he went into the mercantile business and specialized in hides, pelts, and wool. He got the mining bug, silly guy, and he came up here and invested in the mining operations in the Needle Mountains. just up the Animas River north of us, but he lost almost everything in mining. It didn't pay off. So he came back to Durango and he stayed here and went back to the hide, pelt, and wool business. And in a few years, he recouped all the losses he sustained in mining. His firm was considered one of the most prosperous in Durango, and the picture on the right is his building. This is a little bit later. He expanded from just wool and hides into cold storage. So this is his building in I think it was the early 1900s, but you can kind of tell at the lower left part of that picture, those are the railroad tracks. So his business was right at what was then 6th and Railroad, now College and Narrow Gauge. So the railroad was hugely important to his business. So herders or ranchers could bring wool and hides, trade it to Mr. Wolf, and he'd ship it off. And there's one of his bill of ladings for shipping all that wool on the Denver Rio Grande Railroad. So this was huge.
So where were they shipping it to?
Ah, wow, you're a straight man. Yeah, you have to excuse us. We're having too much fun here today. The railroad carried a lot of sheep and they shipped it east for processing in Kansas City or Chicago. This is a wonderful picture that was taken probably in the early 1900s, but again, things didn't change. The sheep are being dipped in all kinds of probably horrible chemicals before they were being loaded into the railroad, the waiting railroad cars for the Denver Rio Grande. They even had special double-decker stock cars for sheep, and I think they might still be there, but there used to be a whole bunch of them on the side of the tracks just north of Tacoma if you ride the railroad, because everybody always wondered what are those double-decker things for, and they were for sheep. They what's a really good story, since the train from Durango heading back to Denver was narrow gauge, the shepherds had to accompany their sheep to Alamosa, where they could change to the standard gauge tracks. And then they could go on to Denver, Kansas City, Chicago for processing. But the shepherds would ride in the caboose, make sure their sheep got on the standard gauge train at Alamosa, and then they'd come on back on the train.
And the ethnicity of the shepherds were?
A lot of the shepherds were Hispanic. They had been here very early on before all of the white folks came in, and a lot were Hispanic, but some were white and some were Anglos and some were Navajo. So and then later on you get Basque and Greek and all types of ethnic groups.
Fascinating.
Yes. Again, read Andy's book. We do have a story of one local family, the Gardners, who did run sheep here. Now, some of you might remember Bernice Baura. She was an avid genealogist and lover of history. She taught here in Durango and grew up. She was born in Cedar Hill, but she grew up in the area, and her family had deep ties to Animas City, Durango, and even to Silverton. And she was also the mother of one of our directors here at the museum, Carolyn Baura. And now that's Bernice on the left with her Navajo friend at sheep camp. Her father, Jack Gardner, brought his first 100 head of sheep when he was 16 years old. And Bernice has told his story, and we have that here. Here we go. This is Jack Gardner's sheep in 1926, I believe this is. Jack joined Frank Rednor in working a herd of about 1,200 head of sheep. In the summer, they'd head up to South Mineral or Cunningham Gulch, which we'll show a picture of next. And that's, if you're not familiar, that's outside of Silverton. And then in the winter, they'd head south toward the Cedar Hill area, which today is in New Mexico, but remember, sheep don't know borders, so it doesn't matter. Jack's job, and you remember he was 16 years old, including paying his herders that worked for him, who are a lot of the Hispanic herders, keeping the books, moving the camps, hauling supplies, and watching over the sheep. It was a tough year, so he thought he wanted to get out of the sheep business, even though it was profitable. But he thought he got the mining bug too. Silly boy. Yeah, he got a job at the Sunnyside Mine, which is above Silverton, when he was about 17. That lasted about 2 seasons. He made a whole $4.25 a day, but he much preferred working with sheep and felt it was a much better occupation. So he went back to sheep. Now, the Gardner family had Romney sheep, which are dual purpose. Can you tell us more about those, Pam?
Yeah, they were a pretty nice fleece on the sheep. It wasn't the softest wool at all, which is interesting because a lot of times in the sheep that you hear about in Colorado, they're related either to the Merino or the Rambouillet. And I know they also mixed them with like a down sheep. Maybe I know Andy mentioned Hampshire or probably Suffolk or something like that, but most time you just called them whiteface. That's what you called the sheep, whiteface sheep. So it's interesting that they raised the Romney because it wasn't as prevalent as like eventually the Corriedale and the Merino.
And they're not seen here at all today.
Yeah, yeah.
Not,
Yeah.
you can get Romney in the United States, but not here. In the fall of 1924, when Jack was 19 years old, he bought 350 head of sheep, and he picked them up down at Bloomfield along the San Juan River. He drove them up to Cedar Hill and then to Horse Gulch, where he landed. And then from Horse Gulch, they went up to Cunningham Gulch, and that's the picture that you see here. They stayed there over the summer. They had 2 camps that summer, and Jack kind of moved the camps back and forth, and he kept busy with that. I love this one story. When Jack was with his herd in the mountains north of Durango, he occasionally encountered motorists who were terrified of the drive to Silverton on the unpaved narrow roads, or the drive from Silverton back to Durango. So people would pay him to drive their car down and then he'd take the train up back to take care of his herd.
That's great.
This is not one of the Gardner's photos, but yep, there are tons of sheep in Maggie Gulch. Maggie Gulch is just north of Cunningham Gulch. And boy, there were tons of them in there.
And they don't look like Romney.
No, yeah, these are not the Gardner sheep.
So I know this isn't the slide we were going to talk about, but you can see that there are colored sheep in that herd. And the colored sheep were used as counters. So maybe you had 1 black sheep for every 100 white sheep. And then that's how they knew. Or maybe it was 1,000 sheep, 1 black sheep for every 1,000 sheep. So you'd actually end up counting the black sheep to know whether or not you had all your herd there, or flock, or band, or
all your sheep.
All your sheep.
Oh, here's the one. There's a really good
with a black lamb.
Yeah, this is Horse Gulch, where people familiar with Durango know Horse Gulch. This was 1926, and he would bring his sheep and let them lamb here. So I guess it was a rather safe place for the sheep to have their babies. And that year they summered at Cascade, so not all the way up to Silverton, but just Cascade, where and that was the year that Jack married Riola Sharp, and Riola lived in Animas City.
And you'll notice that, or at least I'm noticing that I'm not seeing dogs.
Yeah.
So that's why the sheep herders were there. They were there 24/7.
And I would almost kind of say in the 20s, human labor was cheap. Or cheaper than it is today. So sure, you could have lots of herders. And now I think herders rely more on their dogs. Those dogs aren't cheap, but they're cheaper than people. And especially 24-hour, 7-day-a-week people. Yeah, this is a lambing camp in 1929, and that was on the Florida Road east of Durango. So yeah, things have changed a little bit since 1929.
It's just like our camp.
Yeah. And then we have shearing. Jack took these pictures of shearing camp. Every year he hired Navajo shearers from the same family. So he got to know the family really well. And we saw that one picture of Bernice with her Navajo friend.
Mhm.
And this is a different setup than, modern shearing of large quantities of sheep. But it's really fun to see the pictures.
Yeah, I find it fascinating that they kind of have everything together.
Mhm.
It's not, I mean, they're sharing separately, but it's a fascinating picture. And I don't know how usual it was to actually have a Navajo shearing crew in comparison to now where there are a lot of Mexican crews or individual
Mhm.
shearers.
And what's interesting in this picture, they're both men and women shearing.
Yes, yes. Which I don't think you'd find on the Mexican crew at all.
Right. Yep, here's a great picture of the flock at Cedar Hill. And there you can catch a couple little dark heads
Yep,
for those
poking up.
counter sheets poking up. So the Gardner family ran sheep pretty much until World War II. And World War II was kind of massive change for sheep and wool industry. And I'll talk a little bit more about it later, but after World War II, you start getting synthetic materials, so you don't need to wear sheep wool all the time anymore. It's not as important. And they also talk about how a lot of American service people went over to Europe and maybe were in England, and they ate a lot of lamb and mutton. And when they came back, they didn't want to eat it anymore. So taste started changing. And I guess Andy even mentioned today,
Yeah.
Americans eat
A
like a
pound?
pound a year
Yes.
of lamb.
Yeah.
So it has really fallen out of favor.
Well, and I think also we have to take into consideration by the end of World War II, there was overgrazing in the mountains. And when you start losing what they can eat, it's going to change how many sheep you raise.
Right. And change the whole environment.
Yes.
But still, sheep were popular in La Plata County.
They were, and these are meat breed at the looks like 4-H, some event at the 4-H, and they're showing off how beautiful and fat they are. And that's what people want. They wanted those nice big fat Suffolks.
Yeah, we don't have an exact date on this, but this was at the La Plata County Fairgrounds, and that's the old barn that was there. But we have a bunches of pictures of kids with sheep from both the Eureka Grange and the Sunnyside Grange that are long gone, unfortunately. But there are still granges in the area.
There are, and they're sort of coming back again. So.
Yeah, and I love this picture again, La Plata County Fairgrounds.
I know, look at that sheep.
Look at that beautiful sheep. Also, in La Plata County, we had the sale barn, which a lot of people have found memories of. The Rockholds founded the sale barn because Waller's grocery store wasn't paying market rate for sheep. And for lamb. And there's a great picture of inside the sale barn where they're bidding on sheep. This, if you don't remember, the sale barn was where Home Depot is today.
That's where it was.
Yep.
Okay.
And the slaughterhouse was actually across the street.
Okay. All right.
Or
what I found interesting was there was another photo of across the way from the sale barn were these beautiful paddocks. Absolutely, really nice paddocks. I thought, well, okay.
But Sale Barn's gone, and we've talked about how World War II was a turning point. We've been studying World War II this year, especially how it affected La Plata County. And we, in our exhibit downstairs, we have pictures, these wonderful uniforms. All these uniforms were wool. Some were very fine, lightweight wools, like in the officers' dress uniforms. That blue sailor's suit is a lot more coarse, navy blue wool. But wool was so important and we talk about in the exhibit how clothing it wasn't rationed in the United States, but it was close. And how the War Production Board cut down on the use of too many fabrics and fancy gewgaws and cuffs and things like that, because wool was needed for the troops overseas. And that's really kind of what shifted things away from wool. But today, we're still going.
Yeah, so I was wondering, maybe you could mention how many farms there are now.
Well, if you look at the agriculture census, you could just Google that, find all sorts of information. This is done every 5 years. They have information for Colorado as a whole, as well as each of the counties. And you said 121,000, I think, sheep back in the early days. And we have about almost to the number 3 times that many in Colorado today.
Mm-hmm.
But all these numbers are going down. In La Plata County, there are about 70 farms that raise sheep, that report raising sheep or lamb. And there's about 6,500 sheep and lambs listed for La Plata County. And we have about 3 times as many cattle and calves
Mhm.
in La Plata County as we do sheep. As a rule of thumb, across Colorado, there's about 10 times as many cattle as sheep. So it's taken over. So that's kind of where we are today.
Okay. Yeah, so it's kind of shifted, hasn't it, from raising sheep to raising cattle. 40 years ago or so, a little more than that, we were back east and we were raising Corriedale. And the Corriedale is a beautiful sheep. It really is. It's just so big. And it produces a nice, soft, medium fine wool, as well as you can eat it. And it was actually created in New Zealand, and we brought it over here, and it is the second most numbered sheep in the United States. Merino is the first, if that makes sense. So then we decided that the East was not where we wanted to be, so we moved to Colorado. In Colorado, we had Corriedales again, and we also had churro. And we just really, really fell in love with the churro because, again, it's a dual coated sheep. It kind of takes care of itself. It's just, and it has a really wonderful history, a sad history, but a wonderful history. And we have to remember that the Navajo took the churro and raised them and used them for everything that they needed. And during Kit Carson's time and during, I believe it's the 40s, we did our best as the United States to annihilate the churro sheep. And it's a wonderful history. It's worth reading about and hearing about. It's just a sad time in US history, what we did to the churro sheep.
Yeah, there's the wonderful book called Dreaming of Sheep in Navajo Country that talks about the whole destruction that went on
Yes.
during the 1930s.
Yeah, it wasn't just destroying the sheep, because they did that. They also tried to breed out that sheep. So it's a dual coated sheep. You can either go ahead and use the inner coat for fine wool, or you can put it together. The outer coat is coarser, makes a wonderful warp. just depending on, and it's great for hand spinning. So the next slide shows, there we are out in Marble, Colorado. Can you believe that? It was one of the few years where we actually had water.
2005.
2005.
We didn't have many years like that.
No.
I planted a lot of grains and rye
Right.
each year hoping for the rain, but the drought came to southwest Colorado
Yeah.
at about the same time we did. So this is one of the good years.
Yes. And what I sort of want to discuss is, you know, what's involved with having sheep. And it isn't bad. I mean, you know, you have to have some pasture and definitely have to get hay and things like that. But once a year they lamb, if you so choose to have them lamb. Then the next slide. Let's see what it is. So this is these are mainly there, you can kind of see there's some churro, but they're mainly Shetland. We have gone to Shetland sheep. And they are all gathered together because we're getting ready to shear. And we tried to shear before we lamb.
Next slide.
Yep. And here the shearer is shearing, and then we lay it on, you can see it's lattice, we lay it down, and then we skirt it, what's called skirting, and that's trying to get off the tags or the real dirty part of the fleece. That is a really clean looking fleece. I wish they all came that way. And we have lots of helpers, including our grandkids. They are wonderful. And so then, of course, you have to get through the winter. You lamb, then you get through the winter, and and we do not shear twice a year. Some people shear twice a year. We also do not use any chemicals. We tried to make it as organic as possible. We'll use different herbs. So it goes back to like what the Hispanic peoples did with their sheep. They did many of the same things. If they had a sick sheep, the sheep herder was the one that had to take care of the sheep, and he wasn't, and it was going to be a he was the one. He didn't have a bunch of chemicals to give the sheep. He had herbs and things like that. So let's see what else we wanted to discuss. Also, what's going on. Next slide. This is one way to take care of your flock. She's really a rough dog. Can you tell? She is a big baby, but she does an excellent job taking care of the sheep. That's her job. That's what she does. And then the slide on the right, Jim, you want to describe what's going on there?
Well, as far as the dog, it's mainly a deterrent. She's not a killer, generally.
Yeah.
A chicken here or there by accident, but it's mostly a deterrent. But I know I feel pretty strongly that the predators were here first, and our job, basically through deterrents like the dog, the fences, and bringing them in at night, not leaving them out where they're lambing. We only have typically 30 sheep, is our way of protecting the wildlife from the sheep. Because if wildlife get in there, a bear or a mountain lion or whatever, that's typically bad for that animal. So I think it's our responsibility to take care of them. On the other side of this slide, we have some rotational grazing going on. And this is an obvious thing to do when you have limited amounts of irrigation water and grass. You don't want to bring it all down to the ground. As we heard from Andy this morning, the sheep can actually do a pretty better job than cows sometimes in destroying a pasture. So we try to move them around the field. It's a lot of extra work, a lot of extra fencing, but it is a critical thing, and it's trial and error. Lots of rules of thumb, but trial and error.
Yeah, yeah. So I think the main thing is the fact that if you raise sheep, it isn't always, so you don't always have to do something, right? Every day you have to, though, watch them. And it's one of those things where, for instance, if you're raising vegetables, which we do also, you can say, okay, I'm done raising vegetables and it's winter, now I'm done. You're never done. Especially if you're spinning and weaving and doing all the things associated with wool. One of the other things that we wanted to talk about. This is some of the roving that we get, the different colors. These are all natural colors. This was the churro. This is Kelsey, our daughter, who's taking over the farm, and her husband, Trent. She's dyeing. She's actually dyeing some of the wool. Granted, it's not the color on the right, but that's also dyed wool. And so these are different things that you can value add to the wool. It's a lot of work, but it's also very rewarding as well. Okay, this is the Schluter's greenhouse back at the turn of I can't say the century, last century. And what I wanted to show here was the idea that in La Plata County, we have been growing vegetables, flowers, sheep, cows, eggs, all these different things that you do agriculturally for a long, long time. Granted, we took the land, but once we had the land, this is what we did with it. And so it isn't that we can't do this in La Plata County, because we can. And there are different ways today that you are able to do that. And I wanted to mention the fact that we have 4-H that talks about things like that. We have the fairs that talk about it. We have spinning guilds, weaving guilds, embroidery guilds, knitting guilds. We have the Granges still that are trying to get back into the agriculture. We do have some large bands of sheep, not necessarily in La Plata County, but at least a couple bands that are probably about 1,000, something like that. But then we also have small. One of the things that I noticed was when I crossed the state recently, going from La Plata County to Denver, I saw no sheep. I saw no sheep. So maybe they were up in the mountains. I don't know. But it's also, so I wanted to mention the fact that there are different ways of making a living while trying to raise sheep, because you're not going to just raise sheep. You most likely are going to do other things at the same time. You're going to raise vegetables. You're going to raise cows. You're going to raise maybe cows for milk. So there. Go ahead. Poultry, yes, poultry is a good one. And preferably not just in a barn. What else can you think?
Well, I mean, you said how you've implied it's not a big money-making business for a lot of the small holders. But you have to look at all the benefits. And one of the big things, one of the reasons our daughter is adamant about having livestock on the farm and using the wool and so forth, is that it produces the compost. We can use it to produce the compost for the garden, which is one of the main things we use very directly. So there's a whole host of different reasons to have this, but most people can't make a living with a small band of sheep, even with those added benefits. So you can either get bigger, and typically that's a hard thing to do, or you can add value, as Pam was mentioning. You take, instead of selling the raw wool off the sheep, you do something with it. It would be nice to control everything right to the end user, but processing, cleaning, and carding the wool is a little hard for most people with the water and the time and so forth. So we typically send it out to be processed, but then we try to add as much value to it as we can. And then the rest of the value chain, we try to market that directly instead of selling it to somebody and getting half of what they sell it to the customer. So those are some of the things you do. The other part of it, though, this is a wonderful, having a farm, a mixed farm like this, and especially the garden as well, is a wonderful thing for the family, for the children to learn about the biological world and the human's
Mhm.
relationship to it. And one of the things that's obvious, you can't make money on this alone usually, having that other income. And I've worked in sustainable agriculture for many years, and there's a tendency to hold up those farmers who that's all they do. And they're successful. There are a handful of those, but usually there's some maybe off-farm income or non-farm income. The spouse or both spouses may have jobs that bring in other money. And I think that is something as we look to the future that's very important. Now, going to this picture that you're showing, pictures are the thing that really gets me excited about our agricultural history. I've seen the pictures of, I think one of Jerry Zink's relatives, this woman in the 40s, probably holding a big cabbage. Is that right, Susan? The accession, you have the accession number for that. It just gives you a sense of what it was like, and the piles of potatoes at various times of the years in the past. So this to me is what is key for history. You can learn about history, okay, our past. And that's fascinating, and it's a whole world in itself. But you can learn from history and take what's worked and what hasn't worked in the past, look at what we're doing now and where we're going, and use all that to try to get an idea of where we're going. And I work in food, so I'm interested in how the food moved around from the mining camps, who produced it for them, how well did they eat, and there's history records right here in the museum on that. And so how do you grow food? Who did it? Were they well compensated? What was their family life like? What is the social aspects of this? And then how can we take that and learn about what we might want to change to have a more sustainable future? So
Yeah.
it's all about place, as the pictures bring up, as Susan has shepherded us to look at with the title of this program. And it makes it really a living history if you can look at what happened and think about where we're going.
And
So-
save the stories along the way
Exactly.
for future generations.
Exactly.
And we wouldn't do it if we didn't love it.
Yes.
Yes. Perfect ending. So yeah, and I would just want to point out this picture was a postcard. For those of you who are familiar with it, that's Highway 550, heading up north. And that's Engineer Mountain in the back. And there used to be sheep all over there.
Yes.
And you certainly now they're just tourist cabins and
Yes.
or fancy condos and
Cabins?
things like that. Yeah, not cabins, condos. But we love it. Questions? Does anybody have any questions? If you're online, you can type them into the Q&A, and otherwise, we will run downstairs. I'm not seeing any. If you want to type it in, let me do our shameless self-promotion and we'll finish for today. Halloween is coming. To get us in the mood, local author and genealogist Eileen Lyon will be talking about her latest book, What Lies Beneath Colorado, about the pioneer cemeteries and graveyards. Eileen will be here at the museum on Saturday, October 26th at 1 p.m. That's going to be an in-person event only at the museum. Next month, our second Saturday seminar will be on November 9th at 1 p.m., the usual time. Now, we're hoping to host our colleague Bev Rich, who's the director of the San Juan County, Colorado Historical Society, and she's going to talk about electricity in Silverton. She's had an accident, so we're hoping she's going to be ready for us. And if not, we're going to talk about the history of Silverton because they just celebrated their 150th anniversary. So we'll be here. Details and signups will be on our website in the next week or two. Then on November 19th, we're going to be hosting Rosie the Riveter. Chautauqua, say that 3 times fast. Presenter Gail Beaton will be at the Durango Public Library starting at 6:30 p.m. That's going to be an in-person only event and more information will follow, but that's November 14th. Any last check for questions? Don't see any. So thank you all for coming today. Thank you,
Thank
Pam.
you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Jim.
Thank you very much.
This is an exciting start on our look at the power of place. To keep up with us, join us, visit our website for more resources, subscribe to our e-blasts, follow us on Facebook, like us on Instagram, and if you'd like to see continued programming like this, be sure to hit the donate button on our website. We appreciate your support. Thank you for joining us today and have a great weekend.
Bye.
Bye.
Stopping the